Waves of Desire, a husband's hidden affair and the cost of his forbidden love. Welcome back to Will I Be Happy, where we uncover the hidden truths that lurk in the shadows of seemingly perfect lives. I'm your narrator, and today we're diving into a story that happened last summer and as scorching as the sun: secrets, lies, and a forbidden love affair that will leave you questioning everything you think. Buckle up, because this tale of heartbreak will remind you that not everything that glitters is gold. If you're ready to uncover the truth, hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a golden shimmer across the expanse of sand that stretched endlessly before them. The air was thick with the salty tang of the sea, mingling with the heady scent of anticipation that hung between them. Gabriel Field stood motionless, his toes curling into the warm grains beneath him, his eyes fixed on Jenny Cooper. She was a vision against the backdrop of the ocean. As Jenny secured the last stake of their tent, the soft strains of the 1994 song "Forbidden Love" floated over the beach from a nearby speaker. The lyrics, "If I had one wish, love would feel like this," reached her ears, making her pause. She glanced over at Gabriel, catching his eye. The song seemed to echo the unspoken tension between them, the words resonating with a truth neither was ready to admit. The wind teased at the hem of his white shirt, lifting it just enough to reveal glimpses of his taut abdomen, slick with a light sheen of perspiration. Gabriel was acutely aware of her, every nerve ending in his body attuned to her presence. Yet he remained still, unsure of what to do with his hands, his feet, with himself. The easy confidence he usually wore like a second skin seemed to have evaporated under the intensity of the late afternoon sun, leaving him exposed, vulnerable. "You really come prepared," he finally said, breaking the silence that had settled between them like a tangible force. Jenny glanced up, pausing in her task to meet his gaze. A slow, knowing smile curved her lips, and something dark and intoxicating flickered in her eyes. "I live a few miles from the beach. It's a rule that you have to keep your beach gear in the trunk of your car at all times," she replied, her tone light, teasing, as she moved to the next stake. She paused, throwing him a look over her shoulder that was all mischief and invitation. "You know, in case of an emergency beach day." The beach they had chosen was a hidden gem along the Malibu coast, a secluded cove nestled between towering cliffs that shielded it from prying eyes. The sand was soft and white, stretching in a gentle curve that met the azure waters of the Pacific. The waves lapped rhythmically against the shore, their soothing sound a perfect counterpoint to the tension that simmered between Gabriel and Jenny. A few scattered rocks jutted out from the sand, creating natural formations that added to the beach's untouched beauty. Overhead, the sky was a brilliant blue, the late afternoon sun casting a golden hue over everything it touched, making the scene feel like a dream, a world removed from the complications of their everyday lives. Gabriel's rigid stance softened as a grin tugged at the corners of his mouth. Her playfulness was infectious, and he felt some of the tension bleed out of his shoulders. "Well, I'm glad to have you in this emergency," he murmured, the words carrying more weight than either of them expected. A shared moment passed between them, the kind that crackles with unspoken words and electric undercurrents. The tent, now fully erected, billowed gently in the breeze, its front unzipped and open to the shore, an intimate cocoon nestled within the wide-open world. Gabriel pointed towards the small beachside bar perched at the edge of the parking lot, where the sand met the pavement, a structure so perfectly placed it seemed to have been designed just for them. "I'm going to grab us some drinks from the canteen up the beach," he offered, needing to move, to do something, anything to diffuse the growing heat between them. "Could you get me something sweet?" Jenny's voice was light, but there was an undertone, a suggestion that made Gabriel's pulse quicken. "You got it," he replied, his voice rougher than intended, before he turned and made his way towards the bar. Each step felt like a release, a chance to collect himself, but as soon as he was out of her sight, he realized how much he missed the feel of her gaze on his back. The brief respite only served to amplify the desire simmering within him, a desire that threatened to consume him whole if he let it. As he waited for the drinks, Gabriel's mind wandered back to Jenny, to the way her body moved with such effortless grace, to the curve of her smile that promised so much more than words could convey. The thought of her waiting for him, stretched out under the shade of their tent, sent a shiver of anticipation down his spine. When the bartender handed him the drinks, 2 plastic cups filled with something cold and colorful, Gabriel barely managed to thank him before turning back towards the beach, his heart thudding in his chest like a war drum. When he returned, it was as if the world had shifted on its axis. Jenny was sprawled out on her stomach, her cover-up discarded, revealing a bikini that left little to the imagination. She was the epitome of casual seduction, her body a perfect blend of softness and strength, of ease and tension. Her back arched subtly, her knees bent, her feet swaying gently in the air, as if beckoning him closer. Gabriel's breath caught in his throat, and for a moment, he simply stood there, transfixed, slack-jawed, and utterly captivated. "This looks great," he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper, as he stepped closer, the drinks almost forgotten in his hands. "What did you get?" Jenny asked, her tone light, casual, as she glanced over her shoulder at him, her eyes glinting with a knowing smile. But Gabriel could see the tension in her muscles, the way she held herself, and he knew she was putting on a show just for him. The realization sent a rush of heat through his veins. "Something sweet for someone sweet," he replied, finally regaining his composure as he knelt beside her, offering her one of the cups. His other hand, now free, acted of its own accord, trailing his fingertips from the back of her calf up to her thigh. Her skin was warm, soft, and his touch left a trail of goosebumps in its wake, a physical manifestation of the electricity that sparked between them. His fingers spread as they reached the curve of her ass, gently cupping the skin just under the thin fabric of her bikini. The sound that escaped Jenny's lips, a soft, throaty purr, went straight to Gabriel's core, igniting a fire that was barely contained beneath the surface. He squeezed, just enough to elicit another reaction, before releasing her, his hand lingering for a moment longer than necessary. Jenny propped herself up on her elbows and took a sip of the drink he'd brought her, the cool liquid a sharp contrast to the heat of the moment. "Thanks," she murmured, her voice low, sultry, as if the simple word held a world of meaning. Gabriel didn't reply. Instead, he leaned in, capturing her lips in his, the taste of the sugary drink mingling with the natural sweetness of her mouth. It was a kiss that was both soft and searing, a slow burn that threatened to consume them both. When their lips met, the world around them faded, leaving only the two of them and the haunting melody of "Forbidden Love" playing in the distance. Gabriel pulled back slightly, his breath mingling with hers, and whispered, This feels just like that song. Love would feel like this." Jenny's heart raced at the words, a perfect reflection of the overwhelming emotions swirling inside her. It was a moment that felt stolen from time, as if the song itself had willed their kiss into existence. Jenny responded in kind, her lips parting under his, her tongue teasing his in a dance that was both tender and demanding. A soft moan escaped her, a sound that sent a jolt of pleasure through Gabriel's body, making him crave more. But he pulled away, albeit reluctantly, his breath mingling with hers in the narrow space between them. They were on a public beach, after all, even if they were hidden from view by the flimsy walls of their tent. The world outside the tent seemed distant, muted, as if it had faded into the background, leaving only the two of them in a bubble of their own making. The sounds of laughter and waves crashing on the shore drifted up to them, a gentle reminder of the world beyond their shared desire. Jenny rolled onto her back, and Gabriel took the opportunity to stretch out beside her, propping himself up on one elbow, his body angled towards hers. His gaze traveled over her body, taking in every curve, every line, every inch of sun-kissed skin. Desire was written plainly on his face, and he made no effort to hide it. His free hand twitched, the urge to touch her, to feel her under his hands, almost too strong to resist. But it was Jenny who made the first move, closing the distance between them, her fingers intertwining with his, a silent invitation that Gabriel was more than willing to accept. He took the encouragement for what it was, letting his fingers trace a path up and down her arm, his touch light, almost reverent. When he spoke, his voice was low, intimate, meant only for her ears. "So, what's your favorite thing to do at the beach?" Jenny's lips quirked up in a smile, her eyes half-lidded as she looked up at him. "I usually bring a book, but if I'm being honest, I rarely actually read on the beach. Mostly I lie out like a lizard and soak in the sun. Bring the book along as intellectual cover." Gabriel grinned, the tension between them momentarily easing into something warm, familiar. "What's your cover today?" Jenny's hand slipped from his as she reached into her bag, pulling out a well-worn paperback. "It's a paranormal time-traveling romance set in Scotland," she said, her tone slightly teasing, as if daring him to judge her choice. Gabriel raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "So, like, Outlander?" Jenny laughed, the sound bright and musical, filling the small space of the tent. "Kind of, but this is a different paranormal time-traveling romance set in Scotland. Why, are you a Gabaldon fan?" He shrugged, flipping through the pages she had dog-eared, his curiosity piqued. "I got a decent way into the first season of the show," he admitted, glancing up at her with a playful glint in his eye. "Ooh, this is steamy." Jenny laughed again, a blush creeping up her neck. "Yes, it is." "They're making out on a beach right now," Gabriel pointed out, his voice taking on a teasing lilt. "That's relevant." Jenny sat up, leaning over his shoulder to skim the pages he had open. "They are not making out on a beach. They are definitely making out next to a bog." "Fine," Gabriel conceded, snapping the book shut with a grin. "But the beach sounds better to me." Jenny giggled, the sound infectious. "That's because you're on a beach right now." The sun was a fading ember on the horizon, its fiery glow casting a warm, golden hue over the beach, painting everything in shades of honey and amber. 43 years old, Gabriel stood tall, his silhouette sharp against the dying light, a man carved from the very elements that surrounded him. He was the kind of man who commanded attention without uttering a word, his presence alone enough to draw every gaze his way. Broad-shouldered and lean, his body was a testament to years of dedication, each muscle honed to perfection through early morning runs and late-night workouts. His tight, dark Speedo clung to him, leaving little to the imagination, emphasizing the powerful lines of his thighs and the impressive outline of his manhood. The fabric stretched taut across his hips, revealing just enough to send a shiver of anticipation through anyone who dared to look. Gabriel's hair, dark and thick, held a slight wave that gave him a perpetually tousled, just rolled out of bed look. The sea breeze teased it into further disarray, framing a face that was both rugged and refined. His jawline was strong, angular, dusted with a hint of stubble that only served to enhance his raw masculinity. But it was his eyes, deep, stormy gray, framed by lashes that were criminally long, that truly captivated. They held a brooding intensity, a quiet storm always brewing just beneath the surface, tempered by the occasional flicker of vulnerability that made him all the more irresistible. He was the kind of man who seemed born to lead, to take charge in any situation. But in that moment, standing on the sand with the remnants of the day clinging to him, Gabriel was completely and utterly captivated by the woman beside him. Jenny Cooper was the embodiment of summer's last breath, her beauty the kind that stopped men in their tracks and had women glancing back over their shoulders with envy. She moved with the grace of someone who had always known exactly what she was worth, her every step a declaration of confidence. At 31, her skin was a rich, sun-kissed bronze, the result of countless hours spent outdoors, basking in the light of a sun that seemed to shine just for her. The delicate scent of coconut and salt water clung to her, a fragrant reminder of the ocean that was her second home. She wore a bikini that was nothing short of scandalous, shiny, metallic, and tiny. The fabric shimmered in the fading light, catching the last rays of the sun as it clung to her curves, barely covering the essentials, leaving little to the imagination. Her hair, a cascade of light, glossy waves, fell in soft, undulating curls that framed her face like a halo, the kind of hair that begged to be touched, to be tangled in during moments of passion. Her eyes were a striking shade of green, vivid and piercing, framed by lashes so thick they could have been drawn on. They were the kind of eyes that saw straight through you, that could unravel secrets with just one look, and yet they held a warmth that made anyone in their gaze feel like the center of her world. Jenny's body was a study in contrasts, lithe yet voluptuous, her curves subtle yet impossible to miss. The bikini she wore hugged her in all the right places, accentuating the swell of her breasts, the curve of her hips, the dip of her waist. She was the kind of woman who made even the most confident men stammer, who turned heads without even trying. But what made her truly captivating was the way she carried herself, with an effortless grace that was both intoxicating and infuriating, a mixture of self-assuredness and playful teasing that kept Gabriel on edge, desperate for more. Their lives had been carefully constructed, like perfectly curated Instagram feeds, each post a testament to their success, their beauty, their happiness. Gabriel was the kind of man who thrived on control, who measured his worth by the respect and admiration he garnered from his peers. He was successful in every way that mattered, an executive at a tech firm, his days filled with power suits, board meetings, and high-stakes deals. He was the man everyone wanted to be, the one who always had the answers, who never faltered. And yet, beneath the polished exterior, there was a restlessness, a yearning for something more, something deeper. His marriage to Caroline, a picture-perfect match on paper, had become a routine, a series of predictable exchanges and perfunctory touches that left him cold. Caroline was beautiful, of course, with her sleek blonde hair and impeccable sense of style, the kind of woman who was always put together, always on point. But somewhere along the way, their passion had fizzled, their love reduced to a series of obligations and niceties that left Gabriel feeling hollow, unfulfilled. Jenny, on the other hand, was a force of nature, a wild spirit that refused to be tamed. She had always been the one to follow her heart, to chase after her dreams with reckless abandon. Her life was a whirlwind of adventures and spontaneous decisions, each one more thrilling than the last. She was a photographer by trade, capturing the world through her lens, but it was her thirst for life, her hunger for new experiences, that truly defined her. The camera girl was also an author, having penned a novel that explored the nuances of forbidden love, a steamy, unapologetic lesbian romance titled Ginger. The book had gained a cult following for its raw portrayal of passion and the complex emotions that come with loving someone society deems unacceptable. In Ginger, Jenny had poured parts of herself, her own experiences with love and loss, and her relentless pursuit of truth in the face of societal expectations. Writing the novel had been cathartic for her, a way to process her own desires and fears, and in many ways, it mirrored the life she led, unconventional, defiant, and fiercely independent. She had been married once, to a man named David, an artist with a tortured soul, but their marriage had burned bright and fast, leaving only ashes in its wake. Since then, Jenny had flitted from one relationship to the next, never staying in one place for too long, never letting anyone close enough to clip her wings. Their paths had crossed unexpectedly, a serendipitous collision of fate and timing. It had been at a gallery opening in LA, one of those events that Gabriel usually attended out of obligation rather than interest. But that night, something had drawn him there, a nagging restlessness that he couldn't quite shake. The gallery had been crowded, filled with the city's elite, but it was Jenny who had caught his eye. She had been standing in front of a photograph, a hauntingly beautiful shot of a deserted beach at dusk, her expression one of quiet contemplation. There had been something about her that night, something that had called to him, that had made him want to know her, to understand the story behind those green eyes. He had approached her, drawn in by an invisible force, and they had struck up a conversation. What had started as a polite exchange of pleasantries had quickly turned into something more, something deeper. They had talked for hours, about everything and nothing, the conversation flowing effortlessly between them, as if they had known each other for years. There had been an undeniable chemistry, a spark that neither of them could ignore, and by the end of the night, Gabriel knew he had to see her again. After that evening at the gallery, Gabriel couldn't get Jenny out of his mind. The spark between them had been undeniable, and when she suggested they grab a late-night drink at a nearby bar, he didn't hesitate. They sat close, the conversation flowing effortlessly, charged with the kind of tension that was both thrilling and dangerous. As the night wore on, they found themselves in a secluded corner, the noise of the bar fading into the background. Gabriel's hand brushed against Jenny's as they talked, and neither of them pulled away. The contact was electric, a jolt of desire that made the air around them hum. When Jenny leaned in, her lips grazing his ear as she whispered something teasing, Gabriel's restraint snapped. He turned to her, their faces inches apart, and for a moment, the world stopped. The next instant, their lips met in a heated kiss, a collision of need and want that had been building since the moment they first laid eyes on each other. Gabriel's hands tangled in her hair, pulling her closer as the kiss deepened, his pulse racing with the thrill of crossing a line he knew he shouldn't. Jenny responded in kind, her body pressing against his, her fingers tracing the lines of his jaw, sending shivers down his spine. They were lost in each other, the rest of the world forgotten as they explored the newfound intensity between them. Before things could go too far, they pulled back, breathless, the realization of what they were doing hitting them like a cold wave. But the fire had been lit, and neither of them could deny what had just happened. They parted ways that night, but the memory of that kiss lingered, setting the stage for what was to come. Jenny had felt there was something in his eyes, a vulnerability that had spoken to her, that had made her want to reach out and touch him, to peel back the layers and see the man beneath. She had agreed to meet him again, and one date had turned into 2, and then 3, and before they knew it, they were inseparable. It was as if the universe had conspired to bring them together, 2 souls searching for something they hadn't even known they needed. But now, here on this beach, something has shifted between them. It was as if the fates had conspired to bring them together, to ignite a spark that had been smoldering for too long. They were both here, at a crossroads, searching for something neither of them could name, but both knew they needed. Gabriel couldn't take his eyes off her, the way the setting sun painted her in gold, the way the wind played with her hair, the way she looked at him with those impossibly green eyes that seemed to see straight into his soul. He had always been a man of reason, of logic, but in that moment, nothing made sense except the overwhelming desire he felt for her, the need to be close to her, to touch her, to feel her against him. Jenny felt it too, the pull, the magnetic force that seemed to draw her towards him. She had seen men like Gabriel before, men who were used to getting what they wanted, who exuded power and control. But there was something different about him, something that made her want to peel back the layers, to discover the man beneath the facade. She knew she was playing with fire, but for once in her life, she didn't care. She wanted to burn. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the world around them seemed to disappear, leaving only the two of them, standing on the edge of something that felt both dangerous and exhilarating. Gabriel took a step closer, his hand reaching out to brush a strand of hair away from her face, his touch lingering longer than it should have. Jenny's breath hitched, her heart racing as his fingers trailed down her cheek, his thumb grazing her bottom lip. The air between them crackled with tension, with a desire that was both terrifying and thrilling. "I don't know what it is about you," Gabriel murmured, his voice low, rough with barely restrained need, "but I can't stop thinking about you." Jenny's lips parted, her eyes searching his as she struggled to find the words. "Maybe it's because we're both searching for something," she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of her own emotions. "Something we can't find anywhere else." Gabriel's hand slid to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair as he pulled her closer, their bodies almost touching, the heat between them almost unbearable. "What are you searching for, Jenny?" he asked, his voice a mere breath against her skin. Jenny's heart pounded in her chest, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. She didn't have an answer, not really, but at that moment, all she wanted was him. All she needed was to feel his lips on hers, to lose herself in the intensity of his touch. "Maybe I'm searching for you," she whispered, the words hanging in the air between them, a confession, a promise, a plea. Gabriel's resolve shattered in an instant, his control slipping as he closed the distance between them, his lips crashing against hers in a kiss that was both desperate and tender. It was a kiss that held all the longing, all the need, all the hunger that had been building between them since the moment they had met. Jenny's hands roamed over his bare chest, pulling him closer, deepening the kiss as her body pressed against his. The sensation of his hard muscles against her soft curves, sending a thrill through her entire being. For a moment, they were lost in each other, in the taste, the feel, the scent of one another, the world around them forgotten. But then, Gabriel pulled back, his breathing heavy, his forehead resting against hers as he tried to regain some semblance of control. He knew where this was heading, the point of no return. "Jenny," he whispered, his voice thick with desire and something deeper, something almost painful. "We can't." Jenny's hands roamed over his bare chest, pulling him closer, deepening the kiss as her body pressed against his, the sensation of his hard muscles against her soft curves sending a thrill through her entire being. Gabriel's resolve crumbled at the raw vulnerability in her voice, at the way she looked at him with such need, such want, that it made his heart ache. He knew it was wrong, that they were both walking a dangerous line, but in that moment, nothing else mattered. All he wanted was to lose himself in her, to drown in the sensation of her body against his, to forget everything but the way she made him feel. Without another word, Gabriel took her hand, leading her back towards the tent, towards the privacy and seclusion it offered. As they walked, the tension between them grew, each step a promise of what was to come, each touch a reminder of the fire that was about to consume them both. The world around them faded away, leaving only the two of them on the precipice of something that would change everything. The night wrapped them in its velvety darkness, the only illumination the soft moonlight filtering through the tent, casting a gentle glow over their entwined forms. The air was thick with the scent of the sea, mingled with the heady aroma of their own longing. Inside the tent, the world had fallen away, leaving nothing but the palpable tension between them, a tension that had been building from the moment they first laid eyes on each other. Gabriel's hands, strong and sure, moved over Jenny's body with a reverence that belied the heat in his eyes. His touch was both tender and possessive, mapping the curves of her hips, the soft swell of her breasts, the smooth expanse of her stomach. Her skin was warm beneath his fingers, her breath hitching as he brushed the sensitive spot just below her navel. He couldn't get enough of her, the way her body arched toward him, the way her lips parted in a silent plea, the way her eyes darkened with desire as she gazed up at him. Jenny's hands explored Gabriel's body in turn, her fingers trailing over the hard planes of his chest, down the ridges of his abs, until they reached the waistband of his Speedo. She hooked her fingers into the fabric, tugging it down with deliberate slowness, her gaze never leaving his. Gabriel let out a low growl as she freed him, his cock springing to attention, hard and heavy in her hand. The sight of him, so ready, so utterly hers, sent a shiver of anticipation through her. Gabriel's breath caught as Jenny's fingers curled around him, stroking him with a languid, teasing rhythm that had his pulse pounding in his ears. He could feel the slick heat of her arousal as he slid his fingers between her thighs, his thumb brushing her clit in slow, deliberate circles that made her gasp and clutch at his shoulders. Their eyes met, and the raw hunger in her gaze nearly undid him. "Please," she whispered, her voice a breathless plea, her body trembling with the intensity of her need. Gabriel didn't need to be told twice. With one fluid motion, he lifted her, her legs wrapping instinctively around his waist as he positioned himself at her entrance. He paused, savoring the anticipation, the electric thrill of the moment before everything changed, before they crossed the point of no return. Then, with a deep, guttural groan, he thrust into her, filling her completely. Jenny's head fell back, a cry of pleasure escaping her lips as she felt him stretch and fill her, the sensation almost too much to bear. Gabriel buried his face in the crook of her neck, his breath hot against her skin as he began to move, each thrust sending a jolt of pleasure through them both. They moved together in a rhythm as old as time, their bodies locked in a dance of passion and desire. Gabriel's hands gripped her hips, guiding her movements, while Jenny's fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer as their lips met in a kiss that was all fire and desperation. The heat between them built to a fever pitch, their bodies slick with sweat, their breaths coming in ragged gasps as they chased the edge of release. Gabriel's pace quickened, his thrusts becoming harder, more urgent, as he felt Jenny's body begin to tighten around him. Her voice, breathy and tinged with desperation, escaped her lips in broken whispers. "Gabriel, oh God, don't stop." The raw, pleading edge in her tone sent a surge of primal need through him, driving him to push her harder, deeper, as their bodies collided with a force that sent them both spiraling toward the brink. Jenny's nails raked down his back, her legs wrapping around his waist, pulling him impossibly closer as the pressure built inside her, coiling tight like a spring about to snap. She was on the edge, her breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. "Gabriel, make me!" With a growl of possessive hunger, Gabriel plunged into her one final time, his hand slipping between their bodies to find the swollen nub of her clit. His fingers moved with practiced precision, sending shockwaves of pleasure ripping through her core. The world around them dissolved into nothingness as Jenny's body convulsed, her orgasm crashing over her in a violent, all-consuming wave that had her crying out Gabriel's name, her nails digging into his skin as her entire being unraveled beneath him. Gabriel followed her over the edge, his release barreling through him with such force that it left him trembling, his grip on her tightening as he emptied himself deep inside her, their shared ecstasy mingling in a heady, intoxicating blend that left them both utterly spent, yet completely sated. They collapsed together, their bodies still entwined, their breaths mingling in the small space between them. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of their ragged breathing, the feel of their hearts pounding in unison, the aftershocks of their shared pleasure still rippling through them. But then, as they lay there, basking in the afterglow, a sound broke through the haze of their post-coital bliss, a sharp, insistent beeping that had them both freezing in place. Gabriel's head jerked up, his eyes narrowing as he recognized the sound for what it was. His phone, buried somewhere in the pile of discarded clothes, was ringing. The shrill tone cut through the silence, jolting them both out of their daze. Gabriel groaned, rolling onto his back as he fumbled for the phone. When he finally located it, he glanced at the screen, his heart skipping a beat as he saw the name flashing across it. "Shit," he muttered under his breath, sitting up abruptly. Jenny, still dazed from the intensity of their lovemaking, looked up at him, confusion clouding her gaze. "What is it?" she asked, her voice still breathy. Gabriel hesitated, his thumb hovering over the answer button. He met Jenny's gaze, the weight of reality crashing down on him like a tidal wave. "It's my wife," he said, his voice low, laced with regret and something else, something darker, something that spoke of the dangerous territory they were treading. The implications of his words hung heavy in the air between them, a stark reminder of the forbidden nature of their affair, of the consequences that would inevitably follow. Jenny felt her heart constrict, the euphoria of their shared moment replaced by a cold dread that settled in her gut. Gabriel turned away from her, his expression conflicted as he answered the call. "Caroline," he said, his voice a strained attempt at normalcy. Jenny watched him, her chest tightening as the reality of their situation set in. The man she had just shared the most intense, passionate moment of her life with wasn't hers. Not truly. He belonged to someone else, and that knowledge left her feeling hollow, empty. As Gabriel spoke into the phone, his words barely registering in her mind, Jenny felt a tear slip down her cheek. What had they done? What had they unleashed between them? The pleasure, the connection, the undeniable chemistry, they had all come at a price that was just now becoming all too clear. When Gabriel ended the call, his shoulders slumped, a deep sigh escaping him. He didn't look at Jenny, didn't say a word, but the tension in his posture spoke volumes. The magic of the night had been shattered, replaced by a harsh reality neither of them could ignore. In the silence that followed, they both realized that the consequences of their actions were inevitable, and the forbidden love that had brought them together would soon tear them apart. The morning broke with a golden light that filtered through the tent, casting soft, warm rays over Gabriel and Jenny. Their bodies lay intertwined, skin against skin, completely bare and vulnerable in the aftermath of their shared passion. The warmth of the sun kissed their naked forms, highlighting every curve and muscle, the remnants of their night together etched in the sheen of sweat that still clung to their skin. Gabriel stirred first, his eyes fluttering open to find Jenny still asleep beside him, her hair splayed across the pillow, her body a work of art in the soft morning light. The reality of their situation began to sink in, the weight of what they had done pressing down on him. But as he gazed at her, he couldn't help but feel a pang of regret mixed with desire, the memory of their shared night still fresh in his mind. Jenny shifted, her bare leg sliding against his, bringing him back to the present. The intimacy of their nakedness, the way their bodies fit together so naturally, only made the impending confrontation feel even more unbearable. He turned to her, his hand reaching out to touch her, but he hesitated. What could he say? How could he make things right? The connection they had shared had been undeniable, intense, but it had also been built on a foundation of lies and deceit. And now, in the harsh light of day, those lies were impossible to ignore. "Jen," he finally whispered, his voice thick with emotion. She didn't respond, didn't move, and Gabriel felt his heart clench in his chest. He knew he had to speak, had to say something, but the words wouldn't come. What was there to say that could possibly make any of this better? He sat up, running a hand through his tousled hair, and looked out at the ocean. The waves crashed against the shore with a steady, unrelenting rhythm, a stark contrast to the chaos in his heart. This was supposed to be a moment of peace, of connection, but instead, it felt like the beginning of the end. The memory of the song they had heard the night before, "Forbidden Love," echoed in his mind, the lyrics a haunting reminder of the dangerous game they had been playing. "If I had one wish, love would feel like this." The words felt like a cruel joke now, mocking the very idea that love could be something pure and untainted. For Gabriel, love had become something twisted, something forbidden, and he knew that no matter what he did, someone was going to get hurt. "I can't do this." Jenny's voice broke the silence, soft and painful. She turned to face him, her green eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I can't be the other woman. I can't be the person who destroys your life, your marriage." Gabriel's heart ached at the sight of her, the raw pain in her expression cutting through him like a knife. "Jenny," he began, but she shook her head, cutting him off. "No, Gabriel, this isn't fair. To you, to me, to her." She took a deep breath, her voice trembling. "We both know this can't last. What we had, it was incredible, but it was also wrong. We can't keep pretending that this is something it's not." Gabriel felt his throat tighten, his chest constricting with the weight of her words. She was right, of course. He had known it from the start, but he had been too selfish, too blinded by his desire for her to see it clearly. Now, faced with the reality of the situation, he realized that the time had come to make a choice that would change both of their lives forever. Gabriel looked at Jenny, his eyes raking over her one last time, committing every curve, every detail of her to memory. Her skin still glistened with the faint sheen of their shared passion, flushed from their lovemaking, a deep contrast against the dark waves of her hair that cascaded over her bare shoulders. The sun kissed her in all the right places, highlighting the gentle swell of her breasts, the delicate dip of her waist, and the enticing curve of her hips. Her lips, still swollen from his kisses, parted slightly as she breathed, her chest rising and falling in a rhythm that matched his own uneven heartbeat. Jenny, in turn, couldn't tear her eyes away from Gabriel. The way his muscles flexed beneath his taut skin, the way his abs contracted with each breath, his powerful physique exuding a raw, masculine energy that made her want to reach out and touch him again, to feel the strength in his embrace. His hair, tousled from their passion, fell across his forehead, and his eyes, those deep, stormy gray eyes, held a mix of desire, regret, and something deeper, something she had felt all along but had been too afraid to name. Every inch of him was a reminder of the intensity they had shared, a body built for control, now laid bare in vulnerability. In that moment, they were two halves of the same whole, their bodies still humming with the remnants of the fire that had burned between them. But the realization that this was the last time they would ever see each other like this, the last time they would feel each other's touch, made the moment all the more poignant. The physical connection that had once brought them together now served as a painful reminder of what they could never truly have. never wanted to hurt you," Gabriel whispered, his voice hoarse. "But I can't lose you, Jenny. I can't." And then, as if in a dream, he heard footsteps approaching. His heart leapt in his chest. Could it be? Was she coming back? But when he looked up, it wasn't Jenny standing there. It was Caroline. Gabriel froze, the color draining from his face as Caroline's eyes widened in shock. She stood in the entrance of the tent, taking in the sight before her. Her husband, naked, the evidence of his betrayal laid bare for her to see. Gabriel's heart pounded in his chest, a mix of guilt and shame washing over him as he realized there was no hiding the truth now. Caroline's expression was a mix of fury and heartbreak, but it was the cold determination in her eyes that unnerved him the most. She had always been perceptive, but he hadn't expected her to go this far. He hadn't even thought about the possibility of being tracked. His mind had been clouded, driven by his lust for Jenny. But Caroline, suspicious and hurt, had decided to find out the truth. When Gabriel had left, she'd noticed something off, the vague excuses not aligning with the man she knew, or thought she knew. It didn't take long for her to track his phone. Gabriel had been careless, not bothering to turn off location sharing or hide his movements. His horniness had overridden his caution. As she followed the signal, leading her to this secluded beach, the knot in her stomach tightened with every mile. And now, standing before him, everything was confirmed. The lies, the betrayal, the affair laid out in brutal clarity. Caroline's eyes narrowed as she looked at Gabriel, her voice cold and laced with disgust. "Where did you say you were going, Gabe? What lie did you spin to cover this?" "F you!" Gabriel swallowed hard, the weight of his deceit pressing down on him even more heavily now. "I told you I was going to the coast, for a work retreat. That it was important, that I needed some time to decompress, to think about some big decisions coming up at the office." He glanced down at his own nakedness, the shame of it burning his skin. I didn't think you'd ever find out like this." Caroline let out a bitter laugh, her eyes still fixed on his exposed body, once impressive to women and men alike, but now, to her, utterly wretched and repulsive. "A work retreat? Is that all it takes to tear us apart? A few well-placed words and a convenient excuse?" Her voice was laced with bitterness and hurt, each word a dagger aimed at his heart. Gabriel's mouth went dry, his mind scrambling to find an explanation, an excuse, anything that might soften the blow. But there was nothing. The truth was laid bare between them, and there was no escaping it. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I never meant to hurt you." Caroline's face softened, but only slightly, her expression still tight with anger. "You didn't just hurt me, Gabriel. You destroyed us. And for what? For this fleeting moment of passion?" Her gaze flicked to Jenny, who was now sitting up, clutching the sheet to her chest, her face pale with guilt and fear. Jenny's presence in the tent was a painful reminder of the betrayal, and Caroline's eyes, though filled with anger, also held a trace of pity. "I trusted you," she continued, her voice cracking with emotion. "I trusted you, and you threw it all away. For what?" Gabriel had no answer, no defense. He could only stare at the woman he had betrayed, the woman he had once promised to love and cherish, and see the devastation he had caused. The silence stretched out, heavy and suffocating, until Caroline finally turned her gaze back to him. "I don't know if I can forgive this," she said, her voice trembling. "But I know I deserve better than this, better than you." The finality in her words hit Gabriel like a punch to the gut. He had lost her. He had lost everything. Caroline took a deep breath, her expression hardening as she turned on her heel and walked out of the tent, leaving Gabriel and Jenny alone in the wreckage of their affair. Gabriel watched her go, his heart shattering into pieces as the reality of his actions sank in. He had destroyed his marriage, his life, for a moment of passion that now seemed hollow and meaningless. The weight of his decisions crushed him, leaving him feeling empty and lost. Jenny, still clutching the sheet around her, looked at him with tears in her eyes.
Gabriel, I'm so sorry,
she whispered, her voice breaking with regret.
I never wanted this. I never wanted to be the reason you lost everything.
Gabriel couldn't bear to look at her, the guilt and shame too overwhelming. It's not your fault, he said, his voice hollow. I made the choice. I did this. Jenny closed her eyes, leaning into his touch for a brief, fleeting moment before pulling away. You never really had me, Gabe. Not the way you wanted, because I was never truly yours. She looked up at him, her gaze filled with a heartbreaking mix of love and resignation. Go back to her, fix your marriage, be the guy you're supposed to be. Gabriel's hand dropped to his side, his heart shattering as he realized that this was the end. The woman he had fallen for, the woman who had made him feel alive for the first time in years, was slipping away from him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. He had built his life on choices, on decisions made with precision and logic, but now, faced with the most important decision of all, he felt utterly powerless. Jenny stood, her movements slow and deliberate as she gathered her things. Gabriel watched her, his mind racing, desperate for something to say, something to do that would make her stay. But the words wouldn't come, and all he could do was watch as she slipped out of the tent, leaving him behind. The sun was fully up now, the day bright and clear, but it felt like the world had lost all color. Gabriel sat there for what felt like an eternity, his mind numb, his heart hollow. He knew he had to get up, had to face the day, but the thought of returning to his life, to the marriage that had become little more than a facade, felt unbearable. And then, as if in a dream, he heard footsteps approaching. His heart leapt in his chest. Could it be? Was she coming back? But when he looked up, it wasn't Jenny standing there. It was Caroline. Gabriel froze, the color draining from his face as Caroline's eyes narrowed in cold determination. This time, there was no shock, no heartbreak, only a steely resolve that made him feel small and insignificant. I've thought about it, Caroline said, her voice devoid of emotion. And I've made my decision. I'm leaving you, Gabriel. I can't stay in a marriage that's built on lies. Her words were a death sentence, and Gabriel knew there was no coming back from this. He had lost her for good. There was nothing left to say, no more lies to tell, no more chances to beg for forgiveness. Caroline turned to leave, but she paused at the entrance of the tent, her voice softening just slightly. Take care of yourself, Gabriel. I hope you find whatever it is you're searching for. And with that, she was gone, leaving Gabriel alone with the wreckage of his life. He sat there in the silence, the weight of his choices crushing him until he could no longer bear it. He knew he would never be the same. He had lost everything, his wife, the woman he loved, and the life he had built. And as he sat there, the sun rising higher in the sky, casting its light over the beach where they had once been so close, Gabriel realized that he was now truly alone. The man went back to his car, alone, staring at the ocean, a familiar song playing quietly on the radio. If I had one wish. The words seemed to mock him, a cruel reminder of the happiness he had found and lost in the same breath. He let the song play to its bitter end, each word a painful echo of what he knew he could never have again. Meanwhile, Jenny walked away from the beach with tears in her eyes and a hollow ache in her chest. Her heart heavy with the knowledge of what could never be, she put on her headphones, needing something to drown out the pain. The familiar notes of forbidden love filled her ears, and the lyrics struck her with the force of a sledgehammer. Tears blurred her vision as she kept walking, the song playing out the final act of their love story. She would go back to her life, back to her photography, back to the world she had built for herself, but it would never be the same. The memory of Gabriel, of what they had shared, would haunt her for the rest of her days, a reminder of the love she had lost, the love that had never truly been hers. And as the sun rose higher in the sky, casting its light over the beach where they had once been so close, Gabriel and Jenny's paths diverged, one filled with a glimmer of hope, the other with the heavy weight of a love that was never meant to be. If you thought this was intense, wait until you see what we've got lined up next. Make sure to hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Your feedback means the world to us. And remember, love may be blind, but secrets have a way of coming to light. Stay tuned right here on the Will I Be Happy channel. Until then, stay happy.